There is this great myth in bonsai that when you are styling a juniper and you want to make a shari or a piece of that trunk line or branch line, that you have to find the lifeline of the tree. You have to find the live vein that connects each branch to the roots. And I am here to tell you, there's no such thing in a young plant like this. Now, of course, I'm not telling you that there's no such thing as a shari or a live vein or deadwood or a straight connection between a branch over the live vein to specific roots, because that is all true. My problem is that you have to find it when you're styling a young juniper for the first time. I am telling you, it's completely wrong. It's not true. For most trees, there is no such thing as a dedicated connection between a branch and a root. In fact, you could decide to remove the bark of a young plant in a spiral all along the trunk line and still have a living tree. You don't believe me? I'm going to show it to you. And I'm going to show you by doing it on this little branch. Keep in mind, this is not the optimal way to make a spiraling gin. Normally you do that by severely twisting and bending the branch, but you can do it like this. I will later on explain why it is not the best way, but I'm just going to take a knife and I'm just going to cut the spiral from here to here in the bark. And then I'll show you in a couple of months what it looks like. But before I do, let me first tell you, why do we actually have live veins? Why do you not normally find it in this material? And yeah, how do you recognize them if they do have it? Now I realize that for many it is an eye-opener or news that a juniper doesn't have a direct, dedicated connection between any of the foliage tufts and a specific root. It is not completely true that there's no connection. There is a connection. So this branch that might be growing here has dedicated sap veins that go all the way through the bark down to the roots and feed that root. In return, that root takes up water, nutrients, and through the trunk of that root sends it back up. So it is a closed loop going around in the tree. What happens, however, if I make a cut here in the bark, this branch doesn't die off. The reason for that is, even though we have cut through the sap transporting veins in the bark, the tree has a solution. Water will be rerouted on the sides of the cut area and will then go down and also reach the roots. And at some point the bark will be rerouted so that all the roots are still fed and it is fine. Basically, there is the nice vertical connection between a specific branch and a specific root, but there are cross links as well. And a tree is able to reroute your sap flow. Now, if you take a young plant like this, there's absolutely no damage on the trunk whatsoever. So there's also not been any rerouting of sap, and there's also not been any dying of parts of the bark. So, and therefore, the whole bark is healthy and alive. So you can search what you want, but there's no live vein here. There are, of course, preferred sap flow routes, but you don't have to follow those in a young plant. Now, if we take a much older plant, like this juniper here, may have lost branches. We may have cut off a branch or 2, 3, 4, 5. When you then consider what happens, if I were to cut off this branch just holds all this foliage, then for the plant all of a sudden there is a lot less sap flow. And it might be a lot less interesting to keep the sap flow all the way down to the root alive, and part of this branch dies off. You don't see it, the bark is still there, but it is not going to reroute a lot of sap down here. It might in the lower parts of the trunk, but directly below the branch there's not going to be any rerouting. And the bigger the branch, the further down you see dying off of the bark. That is when live veins start to occur. And once you have a dead area that extends down the trunk for maybe 2-3 inches, 5 to 10 centimeters, that is also when you can't do the spiraling anymore. If you then start cutting in the wood, then you might sever the only connection that is left, but that is only for more mature, older stock. So know what you're working with before you decide, I need to find a live vein. Because even in this tree that is quite mature, there is so many branches everywhere around the trunk, there's no deadwood here below the bark. All the bark that you see now is alive, is carrying sap, and I can still reroute a lot of the sap where I would want to. So if I were to say I want this gin and that gin to be connected through a Deadwood feature that goes all the way down the trunk like this, I could in theory do that. I'm not planning on doing it because I think it looks ugly, but I could. I could also just connect the two of those. For this tree, I actually like that a lot of the bark is still alive. I don't want to add a lot of Deadwood features, and you can see here actually the bark popping open as a very clear indication. It's alive here, but it's also alive here in the back. It's alive here because the bark keeps extending and therefore starts peeling with age. Now, I created this tree a few years ago from raw material, and I also created these gins that are on the trunk. And what you can see here is that I've simulated or stimulated the dieback of the bark. This will add an impression of age. So if you create a little gin, consider cutting the bark down in a little moon shape along the trunk down from where you create the gin. And over time this will nicely swell up and it looks like a naturally dyed branch, and the sap has been rerouted around it, but directly below it, as you would with a very big tree. It has not healed. As we are working with very small trees, this might not naturally happen because this is just a tiny little branch, and normally sap flow would just be rerouted directly under the gin and this would remain intact. And then it looks a lot less impressive than when you have it dyed back. Similarly, I'm not sure if you can see it, I've done the same thing here on this side. Here you see cracking of the bark, peeling of the bark. This is a clear sign that the bark is still alive on all these places. Now, this natural development of shari is very nicely seen on this tree, and I hope I can show you what I mean. I am less mobile at the moment. I've hurt my knee and I'm under orders from my wife as well as my doctor to not walk around with heavy pots, so I have to do it from here. And what you can see, hopefully, is this branch was a very, very big branch. It still has a few living areas, but most of it is dead. And here you can now see in the bark, and actually here the bark has started to peel, the lower trunk has also died off. So directly by removing this branch, this part of the trunk has decided I'm not going to keep this alive. So this is the natural formation of live and dead sections of a trunk. And here on the side you can see the swelling of the bark. This is where the sap flow has now been rerouted. And on the back side, hard to tell, you see the same pattern here. This bark is all died off and this is alive. Right, and now knowing that although most of the water transport through the bark is in a linear fashion following the thread or the fibers of the wood, so basically following the shape that the branch had when it was growing, we also know that there are cross connections between these water carrying fibers, and those we can use. By carving a spiral in this section, I am severely breaking the connection, for instance, from this little branchlet to the root down, because most of the sap flow will be pretty much directly along this trunk. But there are side connections, so if I make sure that the bark doesn't dry out too quickly at the edge, and I'm going to use Vaseline for that, then you stop the dieback of this branch, and then new connections will be forged over the next couple of weeks. And what you'll see then is very strong callus growth along the edges. It might actually try to close the wound again, but it might not realize it, because then I'm back again with my knife and I'll cut it back. But at the same time, new connections will be created all the way through the bark. So let's see what it looks like in practice. I'm going to do a very thin yin. If you want to really do this on an important tree, I would recommend just doing tiny little sections, opening them up over time and more pushing that sap flow spirally around the trunk. But this is going to be a one cut, once off, and let's see how it responds over the season. Now, fact of the matter is, it is now already well into spring, and this might not be the optimal time to do this work. Ideally, I would like to do this in the middle of winter when there's not a lot of sap demand. It is hot, it is quite dry, so this plant will get a lot of extra care from me. But I'm now just cutting into the bark all the way to the wood, spiraling around, and I'm removing the bark in between. As said, I'm keeping this very narrow initially. You can always widen it out later on. Making sure that I connect everything and I'm not cutting too close to any of the branches that is there. I do want to give them a chance to respond to this, right? And as said, you can also just do a little section, leave that for half a year and then do another section. That is the safer way to do this. So now we've got a completely connected spiral going from all the way here down, up, once around, twice around, 3 times around. And where does it stop? Yeah, this is actually the end point of the spiral. And now I'm just taking, Vaseline. And this just stops water from evaporating. It will stop the wound from drying out. And somehow it is similar of a lot of coniferous sap. So it aids in wound repair. It aids in keeping it moist and humid. And I find it quite important to make sure that the edges of these wounds are now nice and sealed, so that they don't dry out and the bark really has a fighting chance to reroute the sap flow in the bark. This of course is now not going to go back into the full sun for a week or 2. Let me also show you the back. So you can see that it really is all the way around. So it just keeps on spiraling all around the trunk on all sides. We are in September and the spiral that I cut here in the bark has not affected the growth at all. Now I've been looking at this tree, I've been wondering, should I just bend it up just like I've done on these other branches, and I'm actually layering these off. But I've decided no, I'm not going to. In fact, I'm going to take this spiral and see whether I can pull it up all the way up to here. And then next year I will layer it off, but I'll also try to make it a completely formal upright with a nice spiral going up. I think that is going to be a cool tree. So, no time like today. Let's extend the spiral. I'm going to put this down on the ground because it is a little bit awkward to work like this. And I'll just then plant it in the garden for the season. But the further development of this tree will have to wait for another video, because here it was just about showing if I just remove the bark in a spiraling fashion all around the trunk, it doesn't cause this branch to die off. I now have a nice spiral in here, nice gin, that it can work open further and further over the years. And as I do, I'm going to wire out all these branches. Here down low you can't see it, but I can move the camera. Then you can see I've put some rooting medium here. It is not a lot, but it might be enough to get roots starting to form. And then in spring I'll open this up and put it in a new pot. But for now, this is all set. I can wire all these things out later on in another video. This is it. This is showing you the myth of a live vein. The live vein only occurs when you have a tree that already has deadwood sections and where part of the bark has died off. But if that is not the case and the tree is young and the bark is alive all the way around, you can remove sections of bark without immediately these branches dying. Just make sure you don't completely girdle it. It needs to be quite significant, but then the sap flow can be moved between different branches. And you can say, I have a branch here, but I want the bark to go there. So I'm just going to spiral the deadwood around the trunk slowly. Hope this helps. This was Jelle, growing bonsai, trying to debunk another myth. Keep growing bonsai and see you next time. Oh, by the way, if you want to know more about growing bonsai, juniper, if you want to know more about growing a juniper bonsai, have a look at this video. And otherwise, maybe look just at one of my latest videos. If you haven't subscribed, this is the last moment to do it, because this video is going to end right now.